It should be recording now. Good, I see that now. Well, welcome. This is the webinar, a January technical assistance session for both Youth at Work and Youth Support Service grantees. So welcome to all of you, and I'm glad so many of you are able to join us this morning. Just wanted to start by going over just the outline of today's webinar. We'd kind of shared in our invite is just some welcome and webinar housekeeping, grant requirements. We'll go over kind of just overview of the Workforce One access and data entry, and then contract modifications and extensions, some key kind of dates and requirements related to extensions, and then program resources, and then we'll leave time at the end for question and answers. We've booked, I think, a whole hour, but the agenda won't take a full hour, so definitely time at the end for Q&A. But if you have questions as we go along, definitely put them in the chat. That might be the easiest with as many of us on this webinar. And Corey or I can keep an eye on the chat. And if there is something, a question, we'll try to kind of pause between sections to cover any questions before we move on to the next topic.
¿Cuál es su nombre?
So yeah, welcome and webinar. Introduce myself. I'm Kathy Young, and I'm an employment and training specialist at DEED in our Office of Youth Development. And I am joined today by Corey. I don't see your video. Oh, there you are. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Corey Schmid. Hopefully some of you recognize me from previous webinars. I am the grant coordinator for the Youth at Work grant. So I am your primary contact for that for the most part. And yeah, look forward to going through this webinar with you all.
Yeah, Corey and I yeah, I should have said I work with the support service, youth support service grants, and Corey with the Youth at Work. So like I said, this webinar is being recorded, and then a link will be sent out to all of you, and then posted as well on our websites for each of our programs. And like I mentioned, the chat box is available for you to put questions in or unmute and just ask your question as we go along. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And then if you are watching this recording and are having questions and aren't in the live session, please feel free to email us. Both my email and Corey's email is listed there, and we'll cover your question that way. Let's jump right in then with grant requirements. I'll just check the chat. Sam says, good morning, everyone. Good morning to you as well. So yeah, the Youth at Work grant requirements. Corey, do you want to go over those, and then I'll do our the support service ones?
Yeah, perfect. So kind of basic review back to the RFP. If your organization applied for the Youth at Work grant, you probably saw the RFP at some point. One of the requirements that we did place into the Youth at Work grant this year, and for the first time the previous grant cycle, was that all grantees are required to enter participant data into Workforce One. So participant data is for case managed youth. So if you run programs that are entirely kind of group service based, where you're maybe not doing intake forms on them, those youth do not need to be counted into Workforce One. But do please report any numbers of group services into quarterly reports, because we do want to capture those, especially if you are using Youth at Work dollars to support those youth. So this is kind of geared towards the fiscal and program staff here too, but the monthly RPRs or FSRs, depending on what you're on, depending on your organization, those need to be submitted every month by the 20th of each month to that deed.fsr@state.mn.us email. You can certainly copy me on those emails, but those should really be sent to the DEED FSR box. And then they ultimately do come to me. So please continue to do that. If you have any questions on RPRs or FSRs, let me know and we can try and figure something out there. If there's any that you haven't got paid for, do let me know in case those have slipped through the cracks at all. Quarterly narrative reports, that's the other kind of big piece that we ask of grantees to send in for Youth at Work grants. And I am making those due 45, and that should really say business days after each quarter end. So the next one would be March 4th, and that would cover this previous quarter of October through December 2021. I know many of you have already sent in quarterly reports that covered July through September of 2021. If you have not, please send that in as soon as possible. Those are things that our monitoring team does like to just kind of review before they come and do any sort of monitoring or desk review, just so they have a better understanding of your programs and what's going on prior to the visit. We also like to use those when we get questions from DEED leadership, or even at times we get requests that come through government affairs via the legislature. So sometimes that's where we pull that. And one other thing that we do I put in the bottom of the quarterly narrative reports is success stories. So please include those as much as you are able. If you have youth you are able to get pictures of or from, please let me know, because we do have a specific form that they would need to fill out, so we can use that picture in publications and things like that. We do like to sprinkle those in our legislative report that's due every year, and for multiple reasons, right? It paints a great picture of all the fantastic work that Youth at Work grantees are doing, and also highlights these youth, because that's what these programs are all about, is supporting youth and achieving their employment and education goals. And so that's kind of why we really want to include success stories throughout that. And just, they make our heart feel good, I think, when we see all these kids being successful. So that's kind of where I'm at with Youth at Work grant requirements. Those are pretty much the basic ones. Not that they're not time consuming, but kind of the bare bones requirements. So if you have any questions on those, you can put it in the chat, email me separate, doesn't matter. So Kathy, I'm gonna toss it back to you for the Youth Support Services.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I was going to go over the Youth Support Service grant requirements, which are relatively parallel to Youth at Work. I'll kind of just try to highlight some of the differences from what Corey just shared. That similar to Youth at Work, the Youth Support Service grants all the data tracking on your participants should be in Workforce One. One of the differences is that for Youth at Work, there's a set Youth at Work program, and Support Service, we use a custom program. And so for our Support Service grantees, that custom program would just be Youth Support Service, the state fiscal year 22-23, and then your agency name. So I know I've been working with some of you to make sure that's all set up. If you haven't gotten that set up, definitely reach out to me. It might be a case of getting the correct staff person to have the right permissions or something like that, and we can troubleshoot. The similar with the Youth at Work, the monthly RPRs, FSRs are due by the 20th. And as Corey said, I go through and process them. We track everything on an expenditure report. And so if something hasn't come through on your end, reach out, or I'll often go through, a week or so after the 20th and follow up to make sure I, haven't missed something on my end. I know one big difference right now from the two grants is, and you'll kind of notice this throughout the presentation, is Youth at Work grants all started this summer, and Youth Support Service grants just this past month in December. So, we're a little staggered, which I think can be helpful, but I know for many of you that are Youth Support Service grantees, this is the first RPR you'd be submitting for December here this month. And then the quarterly report's a little different timeline. They're due 30 days after the end of each quarter. So for our support service grantees, that would be this January 30th. And since those grants just got started, what I guess I'm really looking for is that narrative piece. It might be relatively short this month, just kind of a snapshot on kind of how things are going as you're getting things started with your grants. So if you have participants already and you have that data, that were participants served in December, do include that. But if that's just not where you're at yet, that would be something you'd have, next quarter, and that's fine. So that quarterly report template is on our website, and I can send that out too as a follow-up from our webinar today. And then similar to Youth at Work reports should go to Corey, and the support service ones to me. I'll just see if there's anything in the chat. Doesn't look like it. I'll move on to a few key reminders around RPRs and FSRs. Just reminders, common errors that we see. I mean, ultimately, when those come in to that FSR email, they get routed to us, and there are things that we'll need, if it's not done right, follow up with you, which then can just delay the payment process, which we're hoping to avoid for your sake, for our sake. And so I wanted just to highlight a few things that we see come up kind of as common errors or just reminders, particularly with the support service grants, as this is kind of the first RPR. Make sure you're using the correct RPR for the support service grant. If you also have a Youth at Work one, and then also for Safe Fiscal Year 22, each grant year and each grant has a unique form. And so if you already are an agency with multiple grants, just making sure you have the correct form populated in there. If you need that form, definitely reach out to your program coordinator. We can send that over to you. And then submit one. So it should be every month sending in an RPR. If you missed a month and have two expenditures to report, still submit 2 RPRs, like one for November, one for December, instead of combining them. And then if you have no expenditures for that month, submit one as well, and just have 0 expenditures listed for that month, just so we know that we haven't missed something that should have been, a grant payment made. One thing I for sure wanted to highlight, and you probably can't see my mouse, but the new on the RPRs for this fiscal year is that a signature for who has prepared the RPR. So that is right there kind of at the top left of the form, and making sure that and it can be an electronic signature, but that does need to be signed by the person who's preparing the form. And then the final note is just that the RPR has a box to check yes if it's your final RPR, or no if it's not. Check no unless it is your absolute final RPR for that grant, which I imagine for all of us, nobody would be at their final yet. I know support service is just getting underway. So any questions in the chat there, Corey?
Nope.
Yeah. So then just a few, is there something?
I'll answer.
Oh, perfect. So yeah, a few other reminders. The budget, that is making sure you use your approved budget. So again, if you're using the RPR that was submitted to you with the executed contract, that will have the budget that's in your contract, the approved budget. This becomes, I see this come up as an issue kind of when there's a modification in process. Maybe the modification's been requested, it's not fully executed. Keep using the RPR form that until that new modification is executed and the new form is sent. So if you do need to change cost categories, we'll talk about that a bit later. That would need to be done through a budget mod, not just changed on the RPR form. And then the biggest thing I see, and I think maybe Corey, you as well, that holds up a payment and where we have to go back to send an RPR back to you all to get it corrected, is if the previous reimbursement amounts don't match what's previously been reimbursed. And so the I guess best sort of tip there is to just refer back to your most recent RPR, and then it would be the values in column D, which would be what had been reimbursed previously, making sure those match what's in column B for your new RPR. That's probably, like I said, the thing that we see will kind of cause an error and need to be corrected before we send it to grant payment. And then the final thing is just to make sure that the form is signed. Again, it can be a digital signature, but that the form is signed at the bottom, and that person does need to be different from the person who prepared the form. So just, again, separation of duties in this process is important. Let's see. Oh, and Corey answered the question around, if the due date lands on a Sunday, send it in the following Monday. Yeah, the next business day is fine. And then, over to you, Corey, with the stipend and incentive policy.
Yeah, so this will probably be up to a lot of you, potentially. Am I getting feedback? I don't know if I'm getting feedback.
Oh, here, I'll mute.
Okay. So stipends or incentive policy. So these are kind of unique, and we saw an uptick of these during the initial parts of the pandemic shutdowns. So there is a difference between stipends and incentives. So stipends can be provided to participants in place of a wage, or they can use it to cover or kind of support the youth while they're going through some sort of classroom training, on the job training, that kind of thing, to support them in that. And that would be in your wage and fringe part of the RPR for Youth at Work. But what we are asking is that if you are providing stipends directly to youth, that you must have a stipend policy in place. This is partly due to fairness of our stipends being allocated fairly to all participants, are they being offered to participants fairly, that type of thing. Secondly, and equally as important, is if the Office of the Legislative Auditor can decide to come in and audit any state program, and if they decide to audit Youth at Work and they are digging through the files and they see a grantee was paying stipends, well, that is some kind of background documentation that they're going to want to see, that there's some sort of policy stating how these are implemented across the program. So they're more than allowed. We just really need to have kind of a copy of that policy on hand here at DEED. So then incentives. So incentive policies is where it gets a little bit tricky in terms of what how they're done. So incentive policies can be used when you have a youth who is working towards a GED, let's say, and you kind of want to give them a little bit of monetary encouragement, if you will, to really complete the programming needed to complete that GED. So you can do that. Again, you need a policy that would say, a $20 gas card or $20 for finishing this would be something you could offer. You cannot do gift cards that are for places that are solely meant for entertainment. So like movie theaters are no, tickets, sporting events, things like that are off limits with incentive policies. And again, you need to have a policy that states, this achievement earns this amount of an incentive, and you can decide that on your own and what that looks like if your organization wants to do that. And if you have questions on this in particular, we can certainly have one-on-one conversations with you about what that would look like. I did see a comment come through the chat about, do you have examples, best practice policy to participant stipends? Yes, and so that is something we will be putting up on the website as well following this meeting, kind of some example stipend policies and what that can look like at the local level. It's a great way if you have some extra grant funds that you're kind of trying to find ways to spend. This can be a way to support youth in a lot of different, avenues of their life. So Consider doing these if your organization hasn't done so already. If it's not in your current work plan to offer stipends or incentives, we can certainly do a grant modification to include stipends and incentives, or one or the other. You don't have to do both, or you can do both. You can pick one. Doesn't matter on our end. We just really need to have a copy of the policies if you are doing one of these, just so we have it all. So we've got another comment here related to this. So transportation support would be a stipend, and a $100 gift card for completion of the training portion would be an incentive, correct? So, so transportation support could kind of fall under support services potentially, like the budget category support services, not to be confused with the grant, but that budget category. And the $100 gift card for completion of the training portion, yes, would be an incentive. And that's where we would need some sort of policy around what exactly, what training did they complete, or how many hours they put in towards it. You can do incremental, like achievements too. So say they have to pass, I don't know, 5 tests or something in the course of a semester. You could tie incentives to those achievements. I don't know, $10 per test passed, for a total of $50 that semester. That kind of thing could be offered. So again, if you are interested in that, I reach out to either Kathy or I, depending on which grant you have. If you have both youth support services, youth at work, you can loop both of us in and we can go together on that. But again, I just want to reiterate that this is a great method if you have a program that's not necessarily doing wages or jobs, but you want to kind of get some cash in the hands of kids who may really need it to get from point A to point B. Stipends and or incentives really can come in handy here. So you could use them as retention strategies potentially as well. So with that, what do we got next? Workforce One data entry. Did I see another comment? So, sorry, we'll jump to the comment here. Are all the youth support services grants awarded already? So I believe all youth support services grants are awarded. I am not entirely sure about the adult focused ones at this point.
Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, the youth support service grants for state fiscal year 22-23, which those have all been awarded. And then the adult support service grants, I believe are, but that is managed by a different team in our division. So I guess I don't know 100% on that front. But definitely, if you are unsure about grant status, email or you can email me. All agencies awarded or not have been notified at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
And then Workforce One.
Yeah. So
I think that's back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Training.
So a lot of you have been asking about training on Workforce One. So it's a bit tricky because the grant coordinators like Kathy and myself, we don't actually provide the training on Workforce One itself. And that's left up to the Workforce One team here with Indeed. So it is done by a different unit. And unfortunately for a lot of organizations, when we get up and running, we don't have control over when the next trainings are. We tried to do some special ones this fall, and so hopefully some of you were able to get in on that, which is good. But there is some more trainings coming up here, and we'll walk through that. So again, both Youth at Work and Youth Support Services grantees are required to input case managed youth into Workforce One. Should be hammering that home by now. So they do provide virtual trainings. These used to be in person prior to the onset of the pandemic. So hopefully that makes these a bit more accessible to more organizations, especially those of you who may be in greater Minnesota. So when you go into Workforce One, and when we send out the slides, you'll be able to get this direct link. But the link that I provided here at the bottom of this slide, when you go there, you can go under the tab where there's staff trainings and then session search. A lot of you are having difficulties finding the right one. It is tricky to find, but if you just type in ETP Programs Case Management Training, that is the exact title of the program. You should see those populate in your search. As of this morning, I still saw that there was some availability in the April 7th training. Keep in mind that these are a day-long, like 9 to 3:30 type of training, so you would need to book off your entire day for one of these. So if you have new staff, I would recommend jumping on this pretty quickly here, as those slots do fill up very quickly. If you are unable to get a slot for April, do reach out to us and let us know. We can see there is a wait list that you can get on usually. But if it's like a dire need, if you have no one in your organization that's trained, we can talk about that more. So yes, safe to assume these slides will be available after this meeting. Yes. So I will, when we send out the email to all of you, I plan to include just the raw slides themselves, as well as a link to the recording of this as well. So yeah, so you'll have that link here as well. All right, let's see, next slide in terms of data. So the reason we have put in this requirement to do Workforce One is that we get a lot of data requests. So this can be, again, from DEED leadership, and really more often it's coming from legislators and just the legislature in general. So that's why it's important to input data in a timely manner. As you may be aware, Workforce One is, it really is a snapshot in time sort of system, right? So if I go in right now at 10:28 a.m. and go pull a report, all the data that I pull at 10:28 a.m. today is what it's going to show. If I do it in an hour and 10 of you have updated case notes, added 30 participants, the report I just pulled at 10:28 is going to be out of date. So the reason to keep it up to date and input in a timely manner is to make sure when we do have these requests that your data is accurately being captured and all that good stuff, so we can report accordingly. Let's see. So data definition. So I think Kathy and I both get questions every so often about certain data definitions, and I am at least working on finalizing a new version of the Youth at Work policy, which will kind of outline that. The definitions are, if you've run WIOA or MYP programs or been a subgrantee of an organization that has those, you would probably be pretty familiar with these. But basically, it's kind of the demographic definitions, it's the outcome definitions, the performance measure definitions, and I can be sure to send out the Youth at Work policy as well. It's not anything new. It's basically a deeper dive into some of these slides that we have here today. So let's see.
Oh, Corey, can I jump in for the support service?
Yep.
Similar, we try to keep the definitions pretty consistent across programs, and for the support service grantees, that quarterly report template that has the last, I think, 3-4 pages are the definitions of the elements that are asked on that quarterly report. So in terms of, like Corey said, the demographics and the program activities and indicators of performance, et cetera. So that'd be where you find that. And I can include that template in our follow-up email as well. It's the quarterly report template.
And then to get to Jancy's question about, so I'll give you an example here. So she has a great question about basic skills deficient. So let me pull that up here on my end. And I can give you that just so you all have an idea of what it kind of looks like.
I just pulled it up. You want me to put it in the chat?
Yes, yeah, go for it. So this is a computer solve problems, read, write, or speak English at or below the 8th grade level on a generally accepted standardized test or a comparable score on a criterion reference test. or are unable to compute or solve problems, read, write, or speak English at a level necessary to function on the job, in the family, or in society. So that's an example of what we're talking about in terms of these definitions. And again, I will include that as an addendum in the youth at work policy. So youth at work grantees have those, and those are the exact same definitions for youth support services as well. So you don't have any confusion there. So I guess with that, I don't know if there's any other questions on that. Feel free to put them in there, or again, reach out to either of us at the end of this or whenever. So, all right, I think back to you, Kathy, for the contract modifications, extensions.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned at the top of the session today, the Youth at Work grants, I know, are in a little different place about halfway through the fiscal year, as those grants started this summer and then are running through the end of the state fiscal year, June 30th, 2022. Support service grants, like I said, they're staggered. So those grants didn't begin until December, but they also only go through June 30th, the end of this fiscal year. And so we anticipate that some of you, maybe many grants, may need an extension on this first fiscal year of the grant, particularly in the support service. There's not a full year to expend those funds. So if you are thinking that your grant will need to be extended, you can reach out to myself for support service grants and then Corey for the Youth at Work. We are asking that you submit those modification or extension requests by mid-March, the 15th. And that would give us time to review the requests, get the required updated work plan and budget from you, and then get those processed. And then really the contract extension would be a new contract that replaces the old one. So it would need to get fully executed with signatures and then back out to you with that final executed contract. So whether you request an extension or not, another thing we'll be working on this spring, a little bit later in the spring, is getting your state fiscal year 23 grants contracts in place. And so that would be the state fiscal year 23 contract would start July 1st. That would be July 1st, 2022. That's an error on there. Sorry about that. So that would be your current grant for state fiscal year 22 is going through June, and then June 30th, so the very next day, July 1st, 2022. I'll have to edit that. Remind me to do that before we send these slides out. Your state fiscal year 23 grant would start. And so there's, and we'll set those up to start July 1st, even if you're still expending your state fiscal year 22 dollars. So it's quite possible you'll have, if you do request an extension, you would have overlap time where you still have state fiscal year 22 funds you're working to expend, and also have state fiscal year 23 funds available. We just ask to spend down that first year first and then move on to the state fiscal year 23 dollars. So sorry about that date. I don't want to throw anyone off that they have to wait a year for that next grant. It's just the next day, June 30th, and then July 1st. So what is needed for the contract extension would be a modified work plan. And so that would be any modifications to your activities that are listed in your work plan. And then for an extension specifically to include extended timelines. So the activity dates, at least some of the activities would need to be going into that extended time in the work plan. Maybe recruitment is complete, but you're still doing training or that sort of thing. So that those extended dates should be reflected. I should say too, we do extensions kind of in quarter increments. So maybe you think you'll only need an extension through the end of July. We would just do that extension for the full summer quarter. And so our kind of end dates are always on a quarter basis. So that would be then ending September 30th. And you could always expend earlier, even if you got an extension for one quarter and expended, only using 2 of those 3 months, that's fine. And then the other item we would need with a contract extension is the updated budget, and that form would include the additional grant quarters, and how kind of you anticipate your budget, the budget being outlined for the remaining dollars of the grant for that extension. And then it's also really helpful to use that if you are requesting an extension as a chance to review the cost categories. And if you need to shift funds between costs, maybe you're needing to shift more to support service dollars and less from direct services, those cost category shifts can be done and just incorporate into that budget extension. We're already doing a new contract with a new budget. The cost category shifts can be included. I should say, I kind of have modification and extension. An extension is a modification to the grant, but you can also request a modification that does not include an extension. That might be exactly the case where you're going to expend everything by the end of June. You don't need an extension, but you're realizing you do need to shift that the approved budget and shift the funds between those cost categories. That would be an example of a modification that's not an extension. Similar process, and we'd still need that updated form. Yeah, the contract extensions, like I said, they just require the authorized signatures. So very similar process we did to get the grant set up. Signatures from DEED and then from your agency. And one thing to note, just that in terms of timing, and it kind of comes into play with the RPRs, is you request an extension, we kind of open up that grant, the old grant, and it's basically kind of on pause for any grant payments till that new executed contract's in place. So I just say, turning around any signatures, as quick as you can on your end, and we'll do the same on ours to have that new contract modification or extension in place, and then grant payments can be made then under that new contract. So usually what I try to do is not start an extension right before I know an RPR is coming in. I kind of try to get the RPR in, process paid, and then start that extension, just so that we don't run into that situation. And then, like I said, once the extension is complete, that full executed contract extension would be emailed out to you. And it would include a new Excel RPR FSR sheet that would be reflective of the new approved budget and then the new end date for that grant. So again, kind of looking ahead, I know our youth support service grants just kind of got underway, but if you are thinking that you'd be considering an extension, definitely reach out to me, Corey, for Youth at Work folks, and we'd like to have those requests by mid-March so we can get those in place long before the end of the state fiscal year. Any questions with that? Let me jump over the chat and see. I don't see any. Okay. I think program resources is back to you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the program resources we wanted to highlight here was access to Coursera. Some of you may be familiar with that online learning platform. Minnesota in the last kind of year and a half, 2 years has really established a partnership with Coursera to offer these online courses. So there are a bunch of Google-based kind of tech classes that are available for free for all Minnesota residents. So that may be of interest to some of you if you have youth who are interested in those kind of tech fields. There are, I believe, still some licenses available to individuals who are looking to do more in-depth sorts of online trainings through the Coursera platform. So this piece is run through actually the Governor's Workforce Development Board. Ben Balio is the executive director of that at DEED, and he would be your primary contact for any questions on accessing Coursera. So his email is there, ben.balio@state.mn.us. So that is who you'd want to reach out to. And then you can check out on careerforcemn.com the Coursera webpage there. So there's a little bit more in-depth information of what's available. So hopefully some of you will be able to take advantage of that. I know online learning has been a big shift in the last couple of years. So if that is of interest to your organization, do let me know too, and we can see how we can support that. So yeah, Kathy, I think back to you for the website resources.
Yeah, we're about, yeah, final resources. We wanted to just, I know I mentioned them a couple times, is the website. So we both maintain a site for our respective grants. So there's a support service, youth support service webpage, and then a youth at work webpage. And again, those hyperlinks are there, but will be hyperlinked in the slides that are sent out. And we try to keep, updated information on there. The quarterly report templates up there, budget category definition, this recorded PowerPoint, and PowerPoint slides will also then get posted to those sites. So hopefully a helpful resource for you and your colleagues as needed throughout the grant. It's also the final progress reports, legislative reports for these programs are posted, so you can look back at past years if you want, and just kind of a sort of a spot where we're archiving those reports. As Corey said, we're often asked questions on what's been done in the past, what were outcomes, who was awarded, those sorts of things, and that's kind of a good reference to those reports. I think, yeah, this is our final slide. And like I said, we wanted to make sure there was time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions, definitely put them in the chat or just unmute and you can ask them, or email either of us. Our emails are listed there as well. So that's, I guess, the official end, but we'll, like I said, definitely hang out here and address questions that come up. And thank you too for those of you who are just asked questions along the way. Hopefully we got you the answers that were helpful. And I know sometimes if you have a question, other people on the webinar might have had the same question. So the answers are, I know I always learn when other people put questions in webinars, so maybe a question I didn't think to ask, but then I still learn from the answer. So let's see. Where can we find these slides later is a question. So I'll plan to email out a follow-up to this webinar with the PowerPoint slides. They will also then be posted. I'll just go back a slide. They'll be posted on our grant web pages as well. Same slides, but both on support service, youth support service, and youth at work websites. Well, thank you. I'm glad it's been helpful.
Real quick, Krista's decision for youth at work, March 4th, for youth at work quarterly report is due. Yes, covering October through December of last year. Unless March 4th is Sunday, then the next business day, Monday.
I think I'm going to officially stop the recording, but if you are still contemplating a question, we can definitely hang out here and cover that for you. But thank you all for attending today, and hopefully it was helpful and definitely a lot to cover. And just thanks for your time this morning.